I'm ready. Welcome everyone to lesson number 5. We have only one more lesson left. I mean tonight and then next week, and that's it. We're done with this incredibly insightful course. We learned a lot about history, a lot about different Jewish laws and how rabbis make their decisions. And tonight we're going to continue that discussion. Tonight's lesson is called The Fifth Factor: How Emotional and Situational Wisdom Shape Rabbinic Responses. That's tonight's lesson. So we're going to begin with a little bit of a story. King David, the great king of Israel, passes away, and his son, known as Solomon, or became now known as King Solomon, becomes the king. He's a young guy, and he has the whole kingdom in his hands. Doesn't have that much experience, and he has a dream. And in his dream, Hashem comes to him in a dream and says that you could ask for anything and it's granted. You ask whatever you want, you got it. Think about it for a second. Hashem comes to you and says you could get whatever you want. You could ask for power. You could ask for wealth. You could ask for, the ability to win over any enemy. This is the ultimate genie. It's only one wish though, but whatever it is. But King Solomon, he said, I want a listening heart and the ability to judge your people and to distinguish between good and evil. That's what he asked for. A good listening heart to be able to judge properly. And Hashem was very impressed with his answer. And he said that because of that, you're going to also be blessed with wealth and honor, which he was. He was a very successful king. But King Solomon wakes up, and not long later, he's given his first test. 2 mothers come to King Solomon with a dilemma. These two mothers were sleeping in the same house. And in the middle of the night, one of the babies died. And they wake up and there's only one baby left. One baby alive. And they're arguing whose baby that is. One mother says, it's my baby. And the other baby says, no, your baby died last night. It's my baby. And King Solomon's not sure what to do over here. So King Solomon, he starts to think a little bit and strokes his long black beard. He wasn't that old yet. And he says, okay, I have a solution. What we're going to do is we're going to cut the baby in half. And one mother will get one half of the baby, and the other mother will get the other half of the baby. And one mother doesn't really respond. She's just like, okay, interesting solution. Then the other mother begins to scream and says, no, it's just let her take it. Let her take the baby. It's fine. I don't need half the baby. She let the other mother take the whole baby. And King Solomon says, you must be the real mother. You must be the real mother. Why? Because a real mother would rather lose custody of her child as long as she knows that her child is alive and well. And I want to point out here for a second that from a legal perspective, if you ask a lawyer, a judge, you have 2 people come to court. One mother's holding her baby, and and they're arguing of whose baby it is. One mother says, so what they said was that in the middle of the night, one mother rolled over her baby, suffocating it, woke up and realized that her baby was dead. So she switched the babies so that the second mother now wakes up with her baby next to her, not breathing, and heard the baby next to her is alive. And the other mother says that's a ridiculous story, that never happened. But either way, King Solomon was able to use a little bit of wisdom to figure out the truth. But in reality, not in reality, in legal terms, if you ask any lawyer or a judge and you say, okay, what's the case? The rule is that possession is 9/10 of the law. Whoever's holding something, if you have possession of it, we assume it's yours. If you want to come take something away from someone, then you have to bring some sort of proof. You gotta have some sort of claim. You can't just go over to someone and say, hey, that's my watch. I don't know, it's my, get out of here. I'm holding it. It's on my hand, it's on my wrist. It doesn't work like that. You can't just pull something out of someone's hand and assume it's yours and just take it. You gotta bring some sort of proof. If you don't have proof, then, tough luck. But King Solomon was able to see past the law and, I guess, not use the book text, the text from the book. What is it? What's the legalities of the situation? But rather, he understood the behavior of people. He understood that a mother is willing to give up the custody of her child just so that her baby lives. And he also understood that a mother who lost her baby may be feeling very, I don't know the right word, distraught, and pain, and possibly want to take that out on other people and say, you know what, let someone else also lose their child, which is obviously crazy. But King Solomon was able to sense these feelings within people. And that's what made this incredible story so powerful. I think it became one of the most famous stories in Tanakh, the wisdom of King Solomon. And that's what we're going to call today the fifth factor. What it means is that in the past 4 lessons of this course, we're talking about how rabbis, walk their way through the Jewish law to figure out what the law is in a certain, what the ruling is in a certain case. But at the end of the day, sometimes you got to look at not just what the text says, but about the situation that's happening. And we're going to talk more about what exactly that means and understand how that works. So I want to,
what works for a pie, you have to share, doesn't work with live things. So I guess there must be a difficult for anything for you.
Yeah. Why are we calling it the fifth factor? So look at figure 5.1 on page 192. On page 192, there's a little bit of a graph over here. This is what's called the Code of Jewish Law. The Code of Jewish Law was written by the Tur, and he wrote 4 books. The first book is called Orach Chaim, second book is called Yoredeya, the third book is called Even HaEzer, and the fourth book is called Choshen Mishpat. All different parts of Jewish law that are practical and applicable to today's Jewish people, Jewish communities around the world. And you can read a little bit about what exactly each one focuses on. But here we're saying that after you've mastered all 4 books of the Code of Jewish Law, you now have to invoke the 5th book, the 5th section, which is a little bit of common sense, maybe even a lot of common sense. This common sense is supposed to be common, but I'm talking about something that's way more than common sense. This is understanding the deep psychology of people, understanding the emotional behavior of people in order to come to a proper ruling in Jewish law. Let's read text number 1. I'm back to page 191. We'll turn back a page. And this is from Rabbi Hillel Lichtenstein, who writes about the fifth factor, the fifth chelek, the fifth part of the Code of Jewish Law. He says, I remember the off-script conversations we had with my teacher, the great Rabbi Moshe Sofer of blessed memory. He would tell us, take heed, my children. Mastering the four sections of the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law, is a great achievement, but it's within reach. The challenge lies in the fifth section of the Shulchan Aruch, knowing how to guide a generation and a community according to its unique needs, knowing when to act and when to hold back, when to be lenient and when to be strict. That requires extraordinary help from heaven. So you see, in Jewish law, sometimes there could be precedent to be lenient, and there could be precedent to be strict. There could be times where we could say, let's act, and there could be also times you say, you know what, let's not act. And there could be logic that will pull you in both ways. But knowing when to go which way is part of the fifth factor of Shulchan Aruch, the fifth book of the Code of Jewish Law. We call it the fifth chelek, which literally means the fifth part. The fifth part of making a ruling is this idea that we need to be able to. A rabbi needs to be able to invoke this ability in order to really judge a ruling properly, or else. Yeah, you can be. No, that was.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
It wasn't actually saying you should cut the baby. You missed the whole point.
No, you didn't quite. I was saying if you didn't apply this, then you wouldn't have people that would do the other. It was wrong.
No. If you didn't have the fifth factor, then the answer would either be you get the baby or you get the baby. That would be the answer. The only question is how you know whose baby it is, and the answer would be whoever has possession of it. Keep it until you could have some sort of proof, until we could do DNA testing, figure out who the mother is. Otherwise, whoever's holding the baby. King Solomon was able to use a unique form of wisdom to be able to pull out the true mother. But that was King Solomon. For us, it's going to be a lot more subtle than that. We'll leave the King Solomon story aside. That's for King Solomon to do. We shouldn't, we don't need to cut babies in half. You know, they say there's a guy, Yankel was a thief, and he stole the rabbi's watch. And he felt bad. So he goes to the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, what happens? What do you do when you steal someone's watch? So the rabbi said, you got to give it back to the owner. So the Yankel, the thief, says, Rabbi, do you want it? So the rabbi said, no, you should give it back to the owner. So Yankel says, he doesn't want it. So the rabbi says, in that case, you could keep it. Sometimes, you know, here the thief outsmarted the rabbi. But the point is that we have to have this idea. Either way, that's what we're going to learn about tonight. What is this all about? So let's begin. I'll tell you a story. This is a practical story. Okay, here's a good story. Good story about the fifth factor, the fifth chelek, the fifth part of ruling in Jewish law. It was a little bit before Passover, a little bit before Pesach, and a man comes knocking on the rabbi's door. The rabbi's name was Rabbi Yosef. His name was Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, a very, very prominent rabbi, very well known. Even today, he's a very, very well-known rabbi. He lived from 1820 to 1892. And he was a very famous rabbi, lived in Brisk. Either way, Rabbi Soloveitchik gets a knock on his door. There's a man, and he says, Rabbi, I have a question. I want to know if I'm allowed to use milk for the 4 cups at the Seder. Everyone knows at the Seder we have 4 cups of wine. And he wants to know, he doesn't have wine, he wants to know if he could use milk. So Rabbi Soloveitchik listens for a moment, and he turns to his wife, who is, I guess, right over there. and says, can you please bring me 25 ruble? So she brings him 25 ruble, and he hands it, Rabbi Soloveitchik hands this man 25 rubles and says, have a happy Passover, happy holiday, be well. And he leaves. His wife, Rabbi Soloveitchik's wife, turns to him and says, I don't understand. I'm lost. What is, the guy asks you about drinking milk for the 4 cups, and you hand him 25 ruble. First of all, 25 ruble is a lot of money. You could buy a lot more than 4 cups of milk for 25 ruble, with 25 ruble. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said, no, let me explain. He's asking me if he's allowed to use milk for the 4 cups. Clearly, he can't afford wine. Wine is expensive, and he can't afford it. But I'm also noticing, I also realized that if he's asking about milk, then it means that he's not either going to have brisket at his Seder. And if he's not going to have brisket, he can't even afford meat. So I gave him 25 ruble. I don't know, what else can he afford for the Passover Seder? He said, I gave him 25 ruble, that's enough for him to go get matzah, get wine, get meat, and make himself a full Seder, and that should be enough money to be able to do a Seder. So you see how Rabbi Soloveitchik got a simple question, but a rabbi who's not thinking on his feet will say, look, open up the book. Nope, you can't use milk for the 4 cups of wine. Next, bye. Anyone, who else has a question? And that's the truth. That is the law, right? But the Rabbi Soloveitchik was able to sense that there's a deeper question here, and he was able to answer that question. And tonight we're going to go through a few stories, a few what we call chuvos, which is responsas, which is what this course is all about. We're going to go through a few different responsas where this 5th factor was invoked, where rabbis were able to see beyond the question and answer past the question, not just answer the question itself. Answering the question, anyone could do. Anyone could read the Code of Jewish Law and answer a question. It's not that hard. If you learn the Talmud, you learn the Code of Jewish Law, you learn the commentaries, anyone could answer a question in Jewish law, as long as you have a half a brain. But the 5th factor is a little bit more difficult, and we'll see tonight different examples on how that works. So there was a rabbi. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss. He lived in Manchester, England. He was one of the leading authorities in the 20th century's halachic authorities, I should say, in Jewish law. And he wrote a very interesting ruling about that if someone, there was an illness, I guess, I don't know all the details, but there was an illness. Sometimes, that's part of this course, is that we could kind of get a glimpse into the reality of what was going on at the times. But there was an illness where when people had it, anything that went into the room had to be burned. Nothing came out. I guess they couldn't, they wanted to control the disease. So the question that was asked was, is someone allowed to bring in a pair of tefillin so that the guy could put on tefillin, but the problem is it's going to have to be burned. You're not allowed to burn tefillin. Burning tefillin is like burning a Torah scroll. Burning tefillin is like burning a body. Burning tefillin is not something we do. So the question was, am I allowed to purposely bring the tefillin in so that they could do the mitzvah of tefillin, knowing that the tefillin will be burned afterwards? Rabbi Yitzchak Weiss said, you're not allowed. He said, you're not allowed. But now let's read text 2a, page 194. Here was a question that was asked to Rabbi Weiss regarding his ruling. By the grace of God, this is page 194, text 2a. By the grace of God, Friday, Erev Shabbat, Parshas Re'eh, 5723, which is the year 1963, Manchester, to Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Pearl Katz. I guess that was the person who asked him the question. A patient with a contagious disease is hospitalized in a facility where all items patients bring in are incinerated. Is it permitted to bring tefillin there to fulfill the mitzvah? He writes as follows. I have already written in Shilos Uchuvos Minchas Yitzchak, chapter 3, halacha 3, that I'm inclined to say one should not bring tefillin so as not to risk severe desecration involved in their burning. See there for more details. As to what you wrote, that it isn't certain that they will be burned, for perhaps researchers will discover a new cure and the illness will no longer be contagious and the incineration protocol will be lifted. Certainly this is an unlikely possibility. Even though in recent times, science has discovered many new treatments, it is well known that when it comes to caution around contagious diseases, the medical field is more stringent today than in previous generations. Consequently, the likelihood that the incineration protocol will be lifted is remote. So Rabbi Weiss is basically saying to this Rabbi Katz that you're telling me that who knows if it will be burned? Maybe it won't be burned. Maybe it will be burned. The guy for sure needs to put on tefillin today. That we know. The Torah says you got to put on tefillin every day. Maybe it'll be burned. Maybe it won't be burned. So he wanted to say on the possibility that it will, it's only a possibility it'll be burned. So let's just allow him to put on tefillin now. And who knows? Maybe they'll find the treatment to be able to cure the disease and not have it be so infectious. And then we won't have to burn the tefillin. And then we could allow him to at least put it on now. So he says that's not a good reason, because what's the chances of that happening? What's the chance of that happening? It's probably not likely. In the current state, right now, you're bringing the tefillin, it's going to get burned. So he's basically leaning to say, you're not allowed to bring a tefillin. But he continues. He continues his text. He's not finished. However, text 2b, page 196. However, I was prompted to reconsider by a distinguished Torah scholar who argued that withholding tefillin could cause significant distress to a God-fearing patient, deeply pained by his inability to fulfill the mitzvah. Such emotional anguish might even compromise the patient's physical health. In light of this, there is room to be lenient and permit bringing tefillin to the hospital. This scholar showed me that the great and righteous Lubavitcher Rebbe, may he be well, wrote to him this line of thinking regarding a patient for whom there was a question of whether he was permitted to pray and study Torah. Therefore, in our case, we'll talk about that case in just a second. Therefore, in our case, if the patient asks for tefillin, and we know that he will suffer greatly if he cannot fulfill the mitzvah, and there is concern that this distress may cause mental deterioration, we should rule leniently. After all, there is no definitive ruling in this case, and my prior ruling was only that, due to the doubt, it is preferable to remain passive. Therefore, under the above-mentioned circumstances, we should allow him to bring in tefillin so he may fulfill the mitzvah and be at ease. So, you see here, very interesting. He brings in this concept called the fifth factor here. He says, even though from what I read in the Code of Jewish Law, it doesn't seem appropriate to bring in tefillin in order, if I know that it's going to get burned. If I know it's going to get burned. But he says, because I know that there are Jewish people who put on tefillin every single day of their life, and all of a sudden they get this disease, and on top of the stress that's coming with the disease, now you're going to tell him he can't put on tefillin today? That'll make him go meshuggah. It's crazy. What? Yeah, so he says if someone is a observant Jewish person, they put on tefillin every single day, and they want to put on tefillin, and by not putting on tefillin, they'll be distressed to the point that it'll affect their mental health, then in that case, you could bring in the tefillin even if we know it's going to get burned. And he references another case over here that he quotes the Lubavitcher Rebbe with a case. So what's that story? I just want to share briefly. What happened was, and it actually involves my great-grandfather a little bit, which is interesting. But what happened was, Rabbi Weiss this rabbi he's writing this letter, he put together a ruling about someone who has a catheter. Are they allowed to study Torah? Are they allowed to pray? Are they allowed to say the Shema? Because there's a rule in Jewish law that you're not allowed to say words of Torah in front of a dirty place, for lack of a better word.
So you can't pray in the bathroom.
You're not allowed to pray in the bathroom. Yeah, we actually spoke about that in the first lesson, about not praying in the bathroom. But it's not just about bathroom. It's about if there's urine or excrement in the room, you're not allowed to pray in that room. If it smells, there's garbage, you're not allowed to pray in that room. So the question was, someone who has a catheter. Someone has a catheter. This is human waste that's coming through a tube into a little bucket or whatever it is. I don't know how whatever, a bag, whatever, however it works. The question was, is this person allowed to pray? Rabbi Weiss wrote, a person's not allowed to. The Lubavitch Rebbe heard that and he was very upset. Because sometimes people could have catheters for a while. You're going to tell him he can't pray every single day? That's to many Jews, that's crazy. That's crazy. We live on the Torah. Every single day we pray, every single morning, evening, and afternoon. We learn Torah. The Rebbe used to spend most of his day, like hours and hours and hours of his day, studying Torah. That's mostly what he did every single day. So to say someone has a catheter, they can't learn Torah, it would be crazy. So he says they could think Torah, but they can't say it, which is still a big deal for many people. You're supposed to say the prayers every morning. So what happened was the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke to my great-grandfather, Rabbi Yitzchak Dubav, and he told him to speak to Rabbi Segel, to speak to Rabbi Weiss. He wanted to go through Rabbi Segel because he didn't want it to come from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Because if the Lubavitcher Rebbe said it, then sometimes people, if you respected the Lubavitcher Rebbe, then they would just say, okay, the Rebbe said it, sure, I'll change my ruling. And if they didn't respect the Lubavitcher Rebbe, they would say, and they don't listen. The Rebbe was a very big figure. And usually when people are big figures, you usually have like a strong opinion about them. But the Rebbe didn't want it to be something that you do because the Rebbe said. He wanted it to be, I want him to make a rational ruling in Jewish law. So he through Rabbi Segel and through my great-grandfather, Rabbi Yitzchak Dubav, he wrote to Rabbi Weiss the following idea. They said number one, he said like this. Number one, he said, can you really consider it bodily waste if it goes straight from the body into a container? It never really left the body, and if it never really left the body, could it be classified as bodily waste from a Jewish law perspective? I mean, bodily waste is not considered bodily waste when it's in the body. So if it never really left the body and never hit the atmosphere, so to say, the air, could it really be considered? He's questioning just the very idea. He says number two, he said, the reason we don't pray in front of waste is a rabbinic rule. It's not a Torah law. The rabbi said we shouldn't pray in front of waste because it's considered disrespectful. But there's a biblical mitzvah. The Torah tells us that we got to pray. The Torah tells us we have to put on tefillin. These are very important things. Could we get rid of a Torah obligation because of a rabbinic rule that the rabbi said that we shouldn't pray in front of waste? Now, obviously, the rabbis were saying we shouldn't pray in front of waste because they were assuming you could just go to the next room, go outside, move over a little bit, But in this case, the person has a catheter. They can't take it out. This is them for the next, I don't know how long. It could be days, it could be weeks, depending on the person. Could be the rest of their life, yeah, depending on the person. Exactly, the situation. But then the Rebbe added a very insightful idea, which is really what tonight's lesson is all about, the fifth factor. It's not just about what Jewish law says, what Jewish law doesn't say. We could have great conversations about these. Text number 3, page 198, the Rebbe says something fascinating. He says, preventing this patient, this is text 3, preventing this patient from praying or studying Torah will certainly lead to emotional distress and consequently may also weaken the patient's physical health. Several practices have been permitted when this concern is relevant. See Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat. What's he talking about? So that there's a rule in the Code of Jewish Law that if there was a guy who was about to die, the rule is that if a guy's about to die, anything he says, we follow anything he says. It's like he wrote a contract. If someone's on their deathbed, their word is gold. But the only thing is, they have to make what's called a kinyan. They have to make a little bit of they have to lift something up, acquire something to show that they're putting this thing in motion. So usually they'll take a handkerchief and they'll lift it up or something like that. It's done a lot in Jewish law, called a kinyan. But the problem is you can't do a kinyan on Shabbat. You can't lift up this handkerchief kinyan protocol on Shabbat. It's not allowed on Shabbat. You're not allowed to acquire anything on Shabbat. So the question was, if this guy's on his deathbed and he says, I want to give my neighbor $100. I want you to give my neighbor $100. The problem is, if it's on Shabbat, he needs to do this kinyan situation. The question is, are we allowed to do it or not? Are we allowed to do it? The issue is that he's dying. If we don't do it now, there may not be a tomorrow. So the Code of Jewish Law says you could do it on Shabbat. He's allowed to tell his friend, I'll give you $100, lift up the handkerchief, make a kinyan and say, you get the $100. And that way, even if he dies on Shabbat, his word is accepted. His word is admissible in court, in a Jewish court, at least. One second, let me just finish. So the Lubavitch Rebbe quotes this idea and says this. He says, "You see, we care. Sorry. Why? I missed the main point. Why does the Code of Jewish Law say we're allowed to? It's not only because he may not be here tomorrow. The reason he's allowed to lift up this kinyan on Shabbat is because if he really wants to give the $100 to his friend, he doesn't know if he'll be here tomorrow, and it could cause him distress, and it could allow him to lose sleep over the fact, what if I'm not here tomorrow? I need to make sure that my kids get my estate. Whatever it is that he's arranging in his head, I need to do this now. And if I don't do this now, when am I going to do it? Who knows? So for him, for his own health, it's better for him to do it on Shabbat for his own health. And that way, we push the laws of Shabbat aside for a second to allow this person to have the proper, mind and possibly live another day, because we don't want to kill someone too early, especially when they're on their deathbed like that. Any small thing could put someone over the edge. So the Rebbe quotes this story and this law from Jewish law and says, you see, we care, and Jewish law cares about the person's health. And if the person is going to be distressed that they're not going to be able to put on tefillin today, or they're not going to be able to learn Torah today, then we should find a way to be lenient in Jewish law in order to allow it. And that was what Rabbi Weiss was referring to when he shared this idea. I thought it was interesting, but another idea of the fifth factor, knowing when to be lenient, knowing when to be strict, understanding what the person's emotions, what their emotional well-being will be, what their health will be, seeing past the question. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm saying it's extenuating circumstances. What I was just going to say, that's what it sounds like. If you would say no to everyone except someone on their deathbed, right? Because that's what.
So
no. I want to say no.
I kind of see it as black and white, but there's room for gray. And gray is the area where you think about doing lenient, because there may not be a chance for him to do that. So you have to think. It's deep thinking to come up with these things. My mind is blown right now.
So once again, I want to say that there's gray area. You said there's black, there's white, and there's gray area. But the gray area is very much debated. Is very much debated. And the question is, should we be lenient or should we be strict? Many people in Orthodox, a lot of times we lean towards being strict. Why? Because if we wanted to be lenient, we wanted to look for loopholes, we could find every loophole in the book not to do a mitzvah. We could find out any reason why not to do it. But we look at a mitzvah as an opportunity to connect to God. So let's not look at reasons to get away from mitzvahs. Let's look for reasons to do a mitzvah. So what happens is, the question is, when could we be lenient? Or when should we be lenient? Maybe a better question. And using this fifth factor is an important part of that. Knowing when to be lenient. You see that this person's health is on the line. It's important to be lenient. They're going to be distressed, because they can't put on tefillin. There's reason to be lenient to allow him to put on tefillin, even if the tefillin will be burned, which is also against Jewish law. But we could find reason to permit it because of this, knowing the person. But I wanted to share about what you said, extenuating circumstances. That's not really what it is, because there are many times where there's really, really interesting rules where Jewish law will be strict. And I'll give you an example from the first lesson that we did. The Jewish people that were living, I think it was near Spain. I don't remember the city. It was Spain was going to invade Algiers, and they had to run to the hills. And there were Jewish people that were living in bathhouses, and they asked the rabbi, "Can we pray in the bathhouses?" This is not the regular circumstances. This is out of the ordinary. And the rabbi said, no, because they're bathrooms, and you can't pray in a bathroom. So it's not about being an extenuating circumstance. It's about knowing what the person is going through to be able to rule properly. In the case of Algiers, they were easily able to pray outside. There was no issue. Although they weren't living in their natural home, they could have prayed in a different room on the outside. Would it have been easier to pray in the bathhouse? Probably. But the rabbi said, listen, bathhouse is a bathhouse. The Jewish law doesn't allow it. So it's not about extenuating circumstances. It's about really knowing the question, I guess.
No.
We'll go through more. We'll go through more cases, and I think you'll get a better idea.
I think maybe it chose wrong.
Okay, fine. Anyway, I'm just answering your question. I don't have the fifth factor down pat just yet. Okay, let's continue. Another story. If any of those questions before we move on, now would be a great time. Okay, good. Let's continue. Another story. This was in the times of the Rambam, Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. He lived this was in the 1170s. He lived in Egypt, and at the time, there was a lot of the Jewish communities were living under Muslim rule, and the Muslims believed that their Messiah is coming. And what happened was, there was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Yaakov ben Esano, who wrote to the Rambam from Yemen. And there was a Jewish guy who got up and he started telling people that he's Messiah, he's the Moshiach, the Jewish Moshiach. And Yaakov ben Esano wanted to know what the Rambam's thoughts are. What do you think? You think we should follow him? You think we shouldn't follow him? You think he's legit? You think he's real? What's the deal? So let's read page 200, text 4a. This is the Rambam's letter to Yemen, to Rabbi Yaakov ben Esano. He says like this: You mentioned that the ruler of Yemen decreed a forced conversion on the Jews and compelled all the inhabitants of his domain to renounce their faith. As the Almohads did in Morocco and Spain, this news has shaken us to our core and left our communities alarmed. You also mentioned the confusion the decree caused among some people, leading them to falter in their faith and lose their belief with others, while others' faith remained intact. So he just shares first some of the what's going on over there at the time was that the Muslims were in control and they made Jewish people convert to Islam, which basically meant they could not practice being Jewish. And what happened was a Jewish guy gets up and he starts telling people he's the Messiah. Now, for a lot of Jewish people, this was incredible news. A Jewish Messiah, a Jewish Mashiach means that he's going to come back, bring the Jewish people back to the land of Israel, and establish a Jewish state by the values of the Torah. And Jewish people will be able to live Jewishly and not have to convert to Islam. Now, some Jews actually converted to Islam. Some Jews, some Jews didn't. Some Jews were kind of inconspicuous, tried to pretend to convert or whatever it was. But it was a lot of, and some Jews were murdered, by the way. But it was a big problem in those days. But the real question here was this: Rabbi Yaakov and his son wanted to know, should we follow this Messiah? Is he legit? Can we follow him? And the Rambam wrote back a very, very long letter. And in the letter, it's a fascinating letter about the reality, the nature of anti-Semitism. He wrote in his letter about the uniqueness of Judaism as opposed to other religions. He wrote about how to respond to misleading Islamic claims. But the main focus of tonight is all about how to deal with this Messiah, this Mashiach guy. But using the fifth factor, we'll see how the Rambam answers this question. Text 4b. You wrote about the man who boasted of being Mashiach in Yemen. I am neither surprised by him nor by those who follow him. I'm not surprised about him, for he is undoubtedly deranged. And there is no shame in an illness that's not self-inflicted. As for those who follow him, their behavior is due to their suffering and their ignorance about the lofty stature of Mashiach. Mashiach is not a simple person. They clearly don't know who Mashiach is. What surprised me was your doubt about this matter. Given that you are a learned person, this is to Rabbi Yaakov ben Asana. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asana was a big rabbi. You are a learned person who has seen the words of the sages. I am surprised that you wrote that this claimant is known for his piety and possesses a bit of wisdom. Do these qualities make someone God's Mashiach? Mashiach will be in stature highest among the prophets and the most distinguished after Moses. A prophet must be supremely wise to be granted prophecy by God. As our sages taught, prophecy only rests upon one who is wise, strong, and wealthy. The Talmud clarified that strong refers to conquering inner temptations, and wealthy refers to being rich in knowledge. Accordingly, we would not believe an ignorant person who claims to be a prophet. How much more so when he claims to be Mashiach? Mashiach is like the prophet of all prophets. We know of this man's ignorance because you related how he commanded people to give their wealth to charity, and they did not obey him. They acted correctly while he sinned. The Talmud teaches that one who gives generously should not give more than a fifth of their assets. And the logic is very simple, because if everyone were to give away all their money, then I give all my money to you, you give all my money away to her, she gives all your money. We just keep rotating money? It doesn't make sense to give all your money away. So the Talmud says, your work for your money, God wants you to have, you make money, that means God wants you to have that money. You want to be generous? Give 20% of what you make to charity. That's a big mitzvah. You make 100 grand, give 20 grand away. That's being generous. You want to give more than that? Now you're just being foolish. Now, I do want to make a little side note that there are people who do give more than 20% away, but it's usually because they want to, it's either for a specific cause that needs to be dealt with, or because they feel that they've done something wrong, that they want to rectify their past, and they want to, I guess, give to someone else. But those are non-regular circumstances. For the most part, the general public, between 10 and 20% is just fine. That's good. That should be it. But either way, the point over here is that the Rambam saying that this guy clearly can't be Mashiach. But here's the question. Rabbi Yaakov ben Nesanel is writing this question. Why was he asking the question? Why was he, did he not see right through this guy? That he wasn't, the Mashiach that everyone's been waiting for. So I think possibly Rabbi Yaakov ben Nesanel knew that if he tells the people in his community he's not Mashiach, people will probably stone him, especially if the guy has a little bit of a following. But if he sends a letter to the Rambam was a great rabbi, everyone respected the Rambam. So he sends a letter to the Rambam, and the Rambam says he's not Mashiach. Hey, listen, it's him, not me, and the Rambam's also far away, so they can't stone him. So, but that way, so you see how Rabbi Yaakov ben Nesanel was also able to use the fifth factor here a little bit in dealing with the situation. But then the Rambam also uses the fifth factor here in continuing his letter. He gives a little bit of practical advice, and he continues text 4c. The Rambam says, "I will offer you sound advice for the benefit of both the messianic pretender and for the entire community. Imprison this man for a time, put him in jail, until it becomes widely known among the non-Jews that he's mentally unstable." Because he is mentally unstable, but we need people to know that he's mentally unstable. "Make this public knowledge and then release him. By doing this, you'll save him, because when the non-Jews hear of his claims, in other words, the Muslims are going to hear that this guy's the Jewish Mashiach, what do you think they're going to do? They will mock him, consider him a madman, as he truly is, but they will leave him alone. But they'll leave him alone because they know he's kooky. He's not fully there. This maneuver will also protect your community from persecution. However, the Rambam says, if you allow him to remain free until his actions become known to the non-Jews, they will likely execute him, and he may also become a cause for persecution against the entire community." So think about it. This guy gets up, he says he's the Jewish Mashiach, and the Muslims hear about this. What do you think they're going to do? If the Jewish people are following this guy and they're listening to him as a possibility, hey, you know what? Maybe he is the Jewish Mashiach. They'll first of all, they'll execute him in a second. Second of all, as they've done in the past, but second of all, they'll probably also come after the whole Jewish community in general. So the Rambam says, do yourself a favor. Let everyone know the guy's a little bit off his rockers, and he needs some meds. But the point is, that way, when the non-Jews hear what's going on, they'll just call him a madman, they'll call him a little bit off, and that's it. Everyone will live their life. And I believe the ending of the story was that they did, and then they did end up locking the guy up. And I think they ended up executing him, although I'm not 100% sure. But either way, the point is, I guess it wasn't enough that he was mad. He wasn't there. The point is that you see how the Rambam was able to see past the situation a little bit and not just answer the question and not say, no, he's not Mashiach, next. But he was able to see, listen, if we just say he's not Mashiach, that's not good enough. We have to realize that there could be some danger here. And he responded to that as well. Okay. Next question. Next story, I mean. Okay. See how much time we have. Here's an interesting story. An interesting story. In the year 1615, there was a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Meir of Lublin, known as the Maharam of Lublin. And he was asked an interesting question. And this is a very, very rare scenario in Jewish law. It's never, we have very few cases of murder in Jewish law, and this is one of them. Text 5a, page 205. The distinguished Rabbi Shmuel, I received the verdict you issued regarding the hideous and abhorrent act. Hope you said that. I said that word right. The murder committed by one of the ruffians among our people, as noted in the affidavits. Is that what it says? Affidavits. Mm-hmm. That you sent me. The murderer is in the custody of the Polish police, and his fate has yet to be decided. Let me just read. Okay. And his fate has yet to be decided. Where am I holding? Sorry, here we go. So his fate has yet to be. So this guy murdered someone, and now he's in the custody of the Polish police, and his fate has yet to be decided. You requested my opinion on this, whether you are judging correctly in absolving him of the death penalty. Although I am not yet settled and do not have my sacred books with me, as they are still in Lublin, I will respond briefly. So what happened? What happened was there was this guy who, one Shabbat, in public, this was in front of everyone, he murdered two people in cold blood. And everyone saw it. It was clear as day. And what happened was the Polish police arrested the guy. But it's interesting to note here that the Jewish people at the time had autonomy. They had their own, they were able to deal with their own situations. The Polish government allowed the Jewish, if they wanted, the Jewish people could deal with someone from their community who stole, someone of their community who did something wrong. Let you guys could deal with your own people. They let them. So the Polish, if the Polish police would keep this guy, they would execute him. They would execute him. The victim's family also wanted him to be executed. The question was, are we allowed to have him executed? Rabbi Shmuel, who wrote this letter to the Maharam, he suggested that we should not execute him. We should not execute him. Because he said, first of all, we shouldn't execute him because the death penalty in Judaism is very, very difficult to invoke. There's so many things that have to be right in order to give someone the death penalty. And even in this case where the guy was in front of everyone saw it, it's not so simple. He has to be warned beforehand. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But on top of that, and by the way, and you need the Sanhedrin, you need the big court in Jerusalem to be able to do that. There is a concept where Jewish law permits a capital punishment where someone is, destroying society. If someone is, going rampant, he's whatever, he's going crazy, murdering people, and he found a way to get out of the official legal death penalty from the Sanhedrin. The Jewish law allows the ability to execute him, to give him the death penalty, because you're going to save a lot of lives doing that. But Rabbi Shmuel says that we don't have either of those. We can't convict him with a capital punishment because we don't really have a Sanhedrin. And number two, he's not like going around murdering people every day. It happened once. This was a one-time situation. The question is, so Rabbi Shmuel suggested, I think we should get him from the Polish police and allow him to live. Because if we can't give him the death penalty, then we're not allowed to let the Polish government give him the death penalty. Especially because we have the Polish have given the Jewish people autonomy to decide the fate of their own people. So which means if the Polish people are going to execute him, it's going to be because the Jewish community allowed him to. So he says, we can't allow him to. We can't allow them to. So therefore we should have him released and then whatever, let him go. Give him a different punishment. But the Maharam said that he disagrees. He says, first of all, the Maharam disagreed. He said, first of all, I'll tell you, he said, to give someone the death penalty, to have capital punishment to someone, you don't need the Sanhedrin, the big court in Jerusalem. It could be any bet din, as long as it's going to protect society. The guy doesn't have to be a madman running around murdering someone every day. If it's going to stop murderers from murdering, then you're allowed to invoke the death penalty, according to Jewish law. So he said, I think that just leave him with the Polish police and let them do their thing. Let them, and that was, by the way, the rule in that time. You murdered someone, and it was clear that you did. They gave you the death penalty. That was the law. So he said, just let them do their thing. And I think that according to Jewish law, we're allowed to. But then he says something interesting. He says, here comes the fifth factor. He says something very interesting. He says there's going to be long-term consequences if we don't give him the death penalty. Let's read text 5b, page 207. Since this matter has become known among the non-Jews, and the criminal is sitting in prison among them, in other words, in their prison, if you allow him to live, it will disgrace the Jewish community and its values. Moreover, the non-Jews may be emboldened in the future to show leniency in the punishment of Gentiles who shed Jewish blood, God forbid. This concern is obvious. God has thankfully arranged that he's already in the hands of the local authorities. So the best course of action is for the Jewish court to have no involvement in this matter. Rather, the victims' families should demand capital punishment as retribution from the Polish authorities, because you needed that. You needed them to sue, and then they could give them the death penalty. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But either way, so he says, just let them do their thing. Through this, the societal breach will be repaired, the name of heaven will be sanctified, and all of Israel will be blameless. I have written what appears to me to be the law in my limited understanding. Peace to you and all the judges of Israel. Signed, Meir, son of our teacher, Rabbi Gedaliah of blessed memory. So what's this idea? He says, here comes the fifth factor. He says, understand what's going on over here. Even though technically you could show, according to Jewish law, we shouldn't give someone the death penalty. And in Jewish law, we take the death penalty very, very seriously. We don't just throw out the death penalty lightly, unless we really have to. But in this case, he says, understand what's going to happen if you don't give the guy the death penalty. You take him out of jail, and then you let him walk the streets. All of the neighboring non-Jewish people are going to look and see what happened. And they're going to say, wait a second. This guy murdered someone Jewish, and he walks away scot-free. The Jewish people don't care about life? The Jewish people don't care about murder? What's going on? This doesn't This doesn't look right. And on top of that, and in those days, and many times there was, I guess, an anti-Semitic riot would go on, and people would come in and they would murder Jewish people. And the Polish government, the authorities, would have them executed if they were convicted. But if the Jewish people didn't follow the same laws for their own people, and so, this Jewish guy murdered someone and he doesn't get the death penalty, they're going to say, well, why should we get the death penalty for murdering one of your people? And it could cause a huge disaster, big desecration of God's name, first of all, showing that Jewish people don't care about life, which is obviously not true. And number two, it could cause a lot more deaths, by the neighboring anti-Semites. So he says, listen, he's already it's not like we have to turn him in. We don't have to turn him in to the authorities, which could be problematic. But in this case, he's already there. Just stay out of it. Just let them do the thing. The family will sue him. The family will have him executed. Let them deal with it. But let not the Jewish community get involved as a whole, because it'll be just one big mess. So you see here that first of all, Jewish law could be, like you said, very gray. But using this fifth factor, understanding when to be lenient and when to be strict, could be a very important part. And here we were strict. Give the guy the death penalty because this is going to, first of all, save lives in the future, but also, we have to show that we have values and we care about life. And sometimes in order to do that, you have to invoke the death penalty, which is, what happened here. Any questions? No, good. Next story. You have a question before we go on?
Jumping with you because I know it's a lot of talk. It's tough to get in the 2 hours of it.
Yeah. We have two more stories, but they're both short. So, here's another interesting story. We had earlier a case where about chickens. There was a question about whether chickens were kosher or not. Not chickens. Everyone knew chickens are kosher, but the question was a certain breed of chicken that came up in Europe, and they weren't sure kosher or not kosher. A rabbi went traveling across the Middle East to go find the chicken from Cyprus to go see if it's kosher. So just to recap the concept so we could understand the story. In the Torah says all birds are kosher, besides for these 25 birds. Is it 25? Besides a list of birds, whatever the number is. The Torah lists all the birds that are not kosher. Those are the birds you're not allowed to eat. Every other bird is fine. Problem was that we weren't able to identify. We lost the tradition of what those non-kosher birds are. Some of them we know, some of them are obvious, but many of them are very debated. We don't know which bird they're referring to. So what ended up happening was the Jewish tradition became, we only eat the birds that we know are kosher. In other words, that we have a tradition that goes back all the way to Moses, all the way to Moshe, that we got from Mount Sinai. We've been eating this bird ever since then. And if we know that, then in other words, I know that my parents ate this bird, and I know their parents ate this bird, and their parents ate this bird, so I could rely on this tradition, and then I could eat the bird. Otherwise, I don't know. Is the bird on the list of the non-kosher birds? Who knows? We don't know. There's no sign on the bird to be able to know whether it's kosher or not. Animals have signs. There's split hoofs and chew its cud. If an animal has both of those, it's a kosher animal. If you find a brand new animal you've never saw before in the jungle of Africa, and it has split hoofs and chews its cud, it's a kosher animal, according to the Torah. So it's very easy to tell. birds is not like that. We have a tradition, and if it's in the tradition, it's there. If it's not, if we don't know about it, then we don't know about it. And the tradition is not, let's like written down anywhere. It's just what we eat. So what happened was this new bird, this new chicken came around. The question was, is it part of the chicken family? And therefore we have a tradition for chickens, and it's another type of chicken, and it's all therefore also kosher. Or is it an entirely different chicken, and therefore an entirely different bird, and therefore we'll have to consider it a different bird, and therefore make it not kosher? What ended up happening was the rabbis researched, and they found that there was a tradition for that bird. They consider it part of the chicken family, and they made it kosher. What happened was, in the year 1871, the question came up again. And the question came up again, this time a different part of the world, in Dubrovna, in Russia. And the question was, are we sure that it's kosher? Are we really, really sure? Do we really know? And this rabbi, his name was Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Tumarkin, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe Maharash. The Rebbe Maharash was the Rebbe in the city of Lubavitch, the fourth Rebbe of the Chabad Rebbes. He lived in the city of Lubavitch, and he wrote a letter to the Rebbe Maharash asking if this bird is kosher, if these new breeds that are popping up are kosher. And the Rebbe Maharash agreed. He said, yes, they're kosher. But then he shared by the way, it's a fascinating letter. It's in the back of your lesson, Appendix B. But I just want to bring one point from this letter, which is the main idea here. He writes in this letter something fascinating, and this is again very relevant to what we're saying in this lesson tonight about the fifth factor. And we'll read it together, page 210, text number 6. For all these reasons, it seems to me, this is again the Rebbe Maharash, Rabbi Shmuel Schneerson is writing this letter. For all these reasons, it seems to me that these chickens are permitted to be eaten. The humble shall eat and be satisfied. This is a quoting from Psalms. In our town of Lubavitch, they are eaten without the slightest hesitation. I have also heard that this matter has already been thoroughly investigated and they were ruled kosher. Similarly, in places nearby, such as Vitebsk and the surrounding areas, the accepted practice is to treat them as kosher. Okay, here comes this fascinating idea. The stringencies have originated with the slaughterers and the tax leases of our community, as chickens bring them less revenue. So what's he talking about? So in those days, there was something called a shochet. I mean, even today we have something called a shochet. In order for us to eat an animal or a bird, it has to be slaughtered according to the ritual Jewish law on how we slaughter animals. So today we have now it's more commercialized. You have a shochet who sits in a warehouse, and he's able to do it at scale. But in those days, you had a town shochet. And the way it worked was that he was, for most of the time, he was on salary. He got a small salary. And people would bring him, chickens were part of his salary. He's not allowed to charge to slaughter a chicken. Because most people had chickens every day. You had a chicken, you bring it in, and he would slaughter it for free. That was part of his job description. But if someone wanted to bring in, let's say, a bigger animal, like a cow, a deer, maybe a goat, or something else, he was able to charge an extra fee. Because it's harder, it's more difficult, takes more effort, you gotta hold it down, you gotta hire, whatever it is, it's not as simple. So he was able to charge an extra fee. So what happened was, whether consciously or subconsciously, these shochtim, these slaughterers, are a little bit biased to making chickens not kosher. Because chickens don't bring them any money. Chickens the people bringing chickens every day, the guy doesn't make a penny on it. In some communities, he didn't make a salary, but he was able to charge only a little bit for the chicken. So they weren't making any money on chickens. Another profession, which he mentions here, was that in those days there was a tax on meat. In Russia, there was a tax on meat, and what happened was, the way they would do it was there was a person who was hired by the government who was in charge of collecting those taxes, being on top of people and collecting the taxes, and he would take a cut from the taxes and give the rest to the government, to the czar, whatever it was. So a lot of times in the Jewish community, the guys were Jewish, and they lived in the Jewish community. That way they knew all the Jewish meat stores, and they had a cut from all the meat, but they got more money if there was a bigger animal on the table. If there was a cow, a goat, they got paid more tax. If there was a chicken, a few bucks. So they were also, whether consciously, subconsciously, biased or incentivized to make chickens not kosher. So the Rebbe Maharash was basically saying that it's already been spoken about. We've done all the research. It's been accepted already across the Jewish world that these birds are part of our tradition. We eat them. End of story. They're kosher. And the only reason it's coming back up is because people are trying to gain out of making that not kosher. And there's no reason to give any validity to it, and we can move on. But again, it's interesting, this fifth factor, again, it's not necessarily on how he ruled, but it's about why he ruled that way. Why does it keep coming up? Why does this question keep popping up? And he said, you know why? Because people are a little bit greedy. Whether consciously, subconsciously, I don't want to, talk bad about people, but that's the fact, So he exposed the motive using a little bit of intelligence. Okay, last story. This is my favorite story for today. Really, I kept the best for last. This was a story that happened with the Rashba. That happened with the Rashba. The Rashba lived in the year from the year 1235 to about 1310, so a long time ago. And he lived in Spain. Oh yeah, we're on page 212, text number 7. You asked. Here's the question. You asked. Reuven owned a home near the synagogue, which he had built beautifully, and he wanted to connect it to the synagogue to enlarge the sanctuary. However, the community didn't allow this because it would have degraded the value of the existing seats. Think back to remember the story we spoke about in Spain. The seats had a lot of value, so they didn't want him to add more seats by adding an extension to the synagogue. Instead, the community agreed that the extension would house the Torah Ark, and that's what they did, with Reuven sponsoring the entire project. Clearly, Reuven had a little bit of dough. The donor, Reuven, has now come to inscribe his name over the ark so that it will be remembered for his donation. So that he will be remembered for his donation. A few members of the congregation objected. Tell me, do they have the right to stop him or not? You can imagine. He added a massive extension. Now this big, beautiful ark, some synagogues, they have like 31 Torahs in the ark. The big communities, it's a big mitzvah to sponsor a Torah. So many people want to sponsor Torah. Big communities, you have a lot of people sponsoring Torah. You have a lot of Torahs here. They literally added a massive extension, big, beautiful ark in the front, and the big donor's name across the top. And some of the community members are saying, hey, on the ark, come on. Is that allowed? Do they have the ability to tell him, take down your name? What do you guys think, huh? in today's world, there's so many dedications in synagogues, but this was a long time ago before it became so prevalent. And if this question could have changed the course of how synagogues look today. But how did the Rashba respond? What did he share? What was his idea? He said like this. He said, number one, there's no source in Jewish law to prohibit someone from putting their name on something they sponsored. There's no problem. You donate a piece of property. It doesn't say anywhere, there's no precedent in Jewish law that tells us he can't do that. That's number one. Number two, dedications were already pretty common in Spain at the time, in other synagogues. So clearly it was already being done. And number three, he says that in the Talmud, there was inscriptions of donors in the Holy Temple. Talmud says that in the Holy Temple, there was already inscriptions of the donors. So that's few points. But then the Rashba says a very, very fascinating idea, not bringing from Jewish law, but again, using a little bit of common sense, a little bit of the fifth factor, using a little bit of his head. And this is on text 8, page 214. He says something very interesting. He says, had Reuven known, this is a different Reuven, but this is from the Medrash. The Medrash tells us a story. Had Reuven known, and I'll explain the story in just a second. Had Reuven known that God would write about him in the Torah, in Genesis, where it says in the Torah, Reuven heard and saved Yosef from their hand, talking about from his brothers who wanted to sell him as a slave, he would have carried Joseph on his shoulder to his father. Continues, had Aaron known that God would write about him in Exodus, where it says, behold, Aaron is coming out to greet you, he would have gone to greet Moses with tambourines and dancing. Had Boaz known that God would write about him in Rus, where it says he handed Rus roasted grain, and she ate, and she was satisfied, and had some left over, he would have fed her fat calves. The point is, what's the Rashba saying? What's this Medrash? There's many stories in the Torah about people doing great things. One example here is Reuven. All of the brothers of Yosef wanted to sell him. And they wanted to murder him. Sorry. They wanted to kill him. And Reuven gets up and says, look, let's not kill him. Let's put him in a pit. Let's put him in the pit. Well, wait a second. Let's calm down. Let's eat some lunch, take a little break. And Reuven left, and then they sold him. But the Torah was still, Reuven still saved his life. Even though he was sold, Reuven saved his life. But the Medrash says that if Reuven would have known that the Torah would write about his story in the Torah, then Reuven wouldn't have just said, let's put him in a pit. He would have took Yosef, threw him on his shoulders, and said, we're going back home. Let's get out of here. Reuven was the oldest brother. If he would have done that, nothing would have happened. But why didn't he? I don't know if we could answer the question fully, but I think we could. The Medrash is saying that if Reuven would have known that everyone would hear about this story in the Torah, in the Bible, everyone reads about it. If he would have known that this story is going to be recorded forever for history, he would have done so much more. And the Torah gives an example about Aaron greeting his brother Moshe and Boaz helping Ruth. But we see that when people are recognized for their deeds, for their good deeds, they'll do even more. Right? If I knew that this class would be recorded and publicly displayed in front of the entire world, I probably would have prepared a lot more for this class, right? Because I don't think it's going to go that far. I don't know, maybe a few people in our community, I prepared, obviously, but I don't need to be wearing a suit and tie and whatever. It's just us. We could be a little Hamish, but when you see that when someone knows how far their actions will be known, they'll make sure to do it even more. If it's a good deed, they'll do even more good deeds and do even further. So the Rashba says that if we allow this Reuven to put his name on the Aron Kodesh, on the Torah, the ark where the Torahs are held, yeah, it may be for his ego. Maybe. But you know what? At the end of the day, it will inspire him to give more. It will inspire him to give more. And you know who that helps? The community. It helps the community. And that's the main thing here. You know, the community's upset that his name is on the door. Don't be so upset. We'll give another donation to put his name on the lobby, and then on the Kiddush room, and then on the library, and then, he'll continue donating. Some people like their name on the door. But I do want to point out, just a side note, that when it comes to giving money to poor people, people who are in need, it's important that we should not publicize it because of the person who we're giving to. We don't want to humiliate them. So that's just another interesting thing. When you're giving to the community and putting your donating a Torah or donating a book, a chumash, and you have your name dedicated on the inside of it, that's beautiful. That's very nice, and it's great.
Inspire someone else to do it.
Exactly. Not only will it maybe inspire you to give again, it may inspire someone else to give. And I actually tell that to people a lot. That people say, "Oh, I'll give, but I want it to be anonymous." I tell them, why anonymous? When you put your name out there, then other people see that you're giving, and then that may inspire them to give. And it's interesting that there was actually someone wrote to the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe that he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to. Well, I think in that case he was talking about him giving a lecture. He doesn't want to give a lecture because it will inflate his ego. But I think the same thing applies to giving. I don't want to give because it will inflate my ego. I'll feel all proud that I have my big name on the door. And the Rebbe told him, he said, stop thinking about your ego so much and just give the money. Oh, my ego, I'm going to have too much of an ego. Forget about your ego. Just give the money, donate it. It's okay. So what if your name's on the door? It's fine. You'll have to deal with your ego, behind closed doors, but the community needs your donation. Give the money. And in fact, the Rebbe used to tell people, he said, if you're really worried about your ego, then give a donation, put your name on the donation and your name on the dedication, and then give a second donation anonymously. That way you'll inspire other people to give because they'll see that you gave, and then you'll also be able to give anonymously to feel good about the fact that you gave privately. But either way, the point is that we have to sometimes think when we're answering a question, as the Rashba did, there's more to the question. There's more to the question. And in this case, with the donor, putting the name on the building will help the community. So, you let it happen. And Jewish law agrees with it. But I think practically speaking, and this is for all of us listening, whether you're here tonight on Zoom or you're going to be listening to this class when it's viewed to the whole world. I'm kidding. The lesson is that when we're talking to people, whether it's our friends, our family, our neighbors, we always have to think about what they're really asking. What is the question? What's really going on over here? What's the situation? And try to add in this fifth chelek, this fifth factor, and understand, maybe we could think about a little bit of common sense. What's the scenario? Where are they holding? What could this cause in the future, whether bad or good, and use that to make decisions. But really listen like King Solomon listened. Listen to what's really going on, and not just by the letter of the law. And with that, we'll end tonight's lesson. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and we'll see you guys back next week for the last and final lesson, lesson number 6, which is my favorite because it's talking about futuristic questions. Futuristic questions. Questions like what happens when we have communities on Mars. Fascinating stuff. And these are questions that were never asked before. So it'll be exciting.